They're congregating.
Seem to be in a good mood.
They always are. That's a good group you guys got. It's a good balance.
All rise. Thank you. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a good lunch. A scheduling thing to discuss with you real quick. We've talked to the parties. I received a request to leave early on the 24th and 31st. I guess one of you, congratulations. Okay? That's fine. We can leave at 4 o'clock that day. Okay? So put that on your calendars. I'll probably still party your lunch again, but we're going to keep moving. Okay? Mr. Baez? Doctor, you're still under oath.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Doctor, how's that back holding up?
So far, so good.
All right. Now, I forgot to bring this up earlier. I want to discuss it. You, when you were fired from Mount Carmel, you hired a lawyer, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And that lawyer negotiated a separation agreement and severance package for you?
That's correct.
Okay. And as part of your agreement, you agreed not to voluntarily aid or assist.
Where are we going with this?
I think it's
It's a
relevant.
remedial measure. I disagree.
I don't think it's a remedial measure.
Yes, it is.
Talk about it.
Let's go sidebar. Come on, guys. Give you a little loving here. It's right after lunch. Don't go to sleep, but talk to each other. objection has been sustained or disregard the last question.
Dr. Swanner, we have never spoken before today, correct?
That's correct.
Have you spoken to Mr. Zion before today?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to go back to the incident, well, the meeting that you had with Dr. Husel and Dr. Ralston on November 26th of 2018. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Now, when I asked you whether you actually patted Dr. Husel on the back and told him not to worry, that he wasn't going to lose his job, you're not denying it happened. You're just saying you don't recall, correct?
No, I'm denying that it happened.
Okay. Now, having said that, sir, isn't it a fact that Dr. Husel's privileges were renewed at Mount Carmel 2 days after that meeting on November 28, 2018?
I don't remember the exact date, but approximately, yes.
Okay. And that was after having this discussion with Dr. Husel and Dr. Ralston about this potential committee to create the order setting, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Now, in fact, he utilized you and Dr. Ralston as references to get his privileges renewed, did he not?
I don't recall that.
Okay. You're not disputing it, it's just something you don't recall, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, sir, I want to go back to the line of questioning that you had with Mr. Zion in reference to the reports that were run, according to you, after this meeting with Dr. Husel. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes, but I didn't say they were run after the meeting with Dr. Husel. I was just made aware of them after the meeting with Dr. Husel.
Okay. And these were reports created by Leslie Bowman, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Sir, you were asked under direct examination by Mr. Zion. I believe there was a moment where he specifically asked you, came over here and said, how many doctors are doing this? Do you recall that question?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Sure. I said that there was a question asked to you about these reports, and Mr. Zion specifically said, how many doctors are doing this? Do you remember that moment in court, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, isn't it a fact, sir, that these reports were run by Leslie Bowman on November 23rd, 26th, December 5th, December 19th, and the 21st? Do you see? Am I correct in those dates?
I know that these reports were rerun with different parameters several times.
And that's what I want to talk to you about, sir. I forwarded your lawyer now this is specifically labeled as Project Lighthouse, right? These reports?
I believe so.
And they were part of this whole project by both Mount Carmel and Trinity, right?
Yes.
Now, I forwarded your lawyer in case you need to refresh your recollection on dates, but isn't it a fact, sir, that the report parameters were expired patients within 400 minutes from order by Dr. William Husel, MD? Correct?
I don't know. I haven't seen those reports yet.
Why don't you take a look at, do you think it might refresh your recollection if you look at the table of contents of all of the reports that were run?
It may. I did not see all of the reports.
Okay.
My testimony was only...
I want to refer to the one where you testified to this jury that the only doctor or how many doctors are doing this was just Dr. Husel. Take a look at the table of contents. Let me know when you're done. And for the purpose of my question, Doctor, all I need you to do is look at the table of contents.
Okay.
Isn't it a fact, sir, that the parameters for the search and the only doctor looked at was Dr. William Husel, correct?
Correct with this report only.
All 5 of the reports that are listed in that table of contents under Project Lighthouse, the parameters are set to only bring up Dr. William Husel, correct?
For these reports, yes.
And it is also, sir, well, just so we're clear, this is the report that Mr. Zion was referring to you, correct? Referring you to, correct?
No.
Now there's another report from Project Lighthouse. Is that your testimony, sir?
I remember seeing a different report.
Okay. And when exactly was that report done, sir? If you're so confident it's another report.
What was it? I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question again.
Well, let me strike that and ask you this. Sir, the first report done for Project Lighthouse had to deal with expired patients within 400 minutes from order by Dr. William Husel, correct?
The first report in this that you gave me, that is correct for that.
The second report done on the date you had the meeting was expired patients within 400 minutes from order by Dr. Husel, correct?
Yes?
The third report, expired patient, ordered by Dr. William Husel. 400 minutes was taken out, correct?
Yes.
Third report, expired patients with order by Dr. William Husel, correct?
Yes.
And that date was on the 19th of December, 2018, correct?
Yes.
And that was after you had already gone to law enforcement, right?
What was that date again?
December 19, 2018.
Yes.
And the
That's
other
correct.
report, the one I mentioned prior, was on December 5th, 2018, the day you reached out to law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
So, sir, as we went through the timeline of events in your direct and your cross-examination, these are the reports that you had access to as the Vice President of Medical Affairs that were run on Dr. William Husel, correct? And Dr. William Husel
I would not say I had access to all of these. I don't remember seeing these prior to today.
Now, sir, you also, the parameters of this report also only refer to expired patients, do they not?
That's correct.
And that is patients who have passed away, correct?
Yes.
And then there was a fifth report run on December 21st, 2018, correct? That will be at the bottom of the page, sir.
Yes.
And this also has to deal only with expired patients, correct?
Yes?
And the only doctor looked at in this report is Dr. William Husel, correct?
Yes.
Sir, the reports that you looked at for Project Lighthouse as it related to the searches of 500 mics of fentanyl and above also included that of a patient named Tracy Young. Is it not correct?
I don't recall that name.
Let me ask you this. Are you saying you don't recall that name at all until today? Or you don't recall that name back then?
I don't recall that name back then. I heard that name for the first time approximately 1 week ago.
So it wasn't until a week ago that the name Tracy Young was brought to your attention after you had already been fired from Mount Carmel? And
That's true.
And
Okay,
after...
you're getting compound questions.
I'm sorry, I was caught myself, Judge. And that's after you had reported Dr. Husel to the police?
Yes?
And after Dr. Husel was charged with 14 counts of murder, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, sir, you're aware that the report on December 5th, when the parameter was taken out of the 400 minutes. Okay, let me back.
Okay, hold on, stop, we got an objection going. Is this a sidebar?
Well, I don't think so. Dr. Swanner said, I'm not familiar with those reports. I'm not familiar with the parameters. I don't think it's fair to further question them.
Okay, let's go sidebar. Ladies and gentlemen. My sidebar. Get busy with a minute. They're awful quiet back there.
They were saying something about their findings that.
There's been talk about it. I would be upset.
I don't know how that would affect you. September.
Well, just don't change it.
a few months later,
You're not falling apart there on me, Sam, are you? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue on with the testimony. Sometimes we have to do this judge stuff. Okay, you just got to have some patience with me. Okay? With that, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Ralston, just so we're clear, I'm referring to only the reports created by Leslie Bowman, okay, for the purposes of my questions.
Just for clarification, I'm Dr. Swanner, and I understand what you're referring to.
All right. So, Dr. Swanner, what did I call you? Dr. Ross.
You called me Dr. Ralston.
All right, Dr. Swanner. Dr. Swanner, I'm specifically referring to the reports created by Leslie Bowman, okay?
Okay.
And those were the questions asked you by Mr. Zion in reference to that report that we were discussing, that you discussed during your direct, okay? By Leslie Bowman. Now, having said that, if the parameters for the December 5th report was expired patients ordered by Dr. Husel to patient's discharge date and time for 500 mics of fentanyl or greater IV push. So those are the parameters of that search. You understand?
Yes?
If in fact a patient by the name of Tracy Young received 2,500 micrograms of
Objection, Your
fentanyl
Honor.
and
Let's finish the question.
went on to live another 9 days after the fentanyl had left her system, would that have shown up in that report under those
Okay,
parameters?
sustained, rephrase. Disregard the question, ladies and
Sure.
gentlemen.
If in fact a dose of 2,500 micrograms came up, was in the Mount Carmel medical record system, that would have shown up on that report, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and that was December 5th, 2018, right? That report date?
Yes?
And that's the same date that Mount Carmel took this case to the state attorney's office in order to prosecute Dr. Husel, right?
Yes.
Now, sir, you mentioned in your direct examination about Trinity Health being the parent company of Mount Carmel. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes?
Now, Trinity Health is in charge of 88 different hospitals across the country. Isn't that correct?
That could be. I don't remember the actual number.
And this is a $20 billion corporation, is it not?
Yes?
Having said that, sir, at this point, you mentioned that at some point there was an external peer review. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes?
There at a specific time was a review done by someone external to Mount Carmel by the name of Dr. Toka Bradley. Do you recall that?
Yes?
And Ms. Toka Bradley, when she conducted this review of some of the patients as you described, let me strike that. Ms. Toka Bradley reviewed, her initial review was that of 5 patients, right?
I don't recall the specific number.
Okay. But you know it was a handful of cases, right?
That's correct.
You also know that she didn't have access to the medical records,
Objection, Your
right?
Honor, as to what Taco
Objection,
Bradley
sustained.
Well, as far as you're concerned in relation to that review, or as far as you're aware, sir, that Dr. Toka Bradley did not have
Objection.
access to the medical
Taco
records.
Bradley had access to, or what her knowledge was.
Okay,
he's aware.
sustained. Okay.
I can't understand the objection when you're.
Okay, Mr. Zion, it's a speculation as to what she may know. Okay, and I sustained it. You two-parted it.
Can I ask him if he's aware? Dr. Swanner, are you aware that Dr. Toka Bradley did not have access to the medical records when doing this review?
Objection.
No.
I'll permit the question.
So you're not aware?
You just testified to that.
I'm transitioning, Judge. So you're not, this was done just a couple of days before going to the police, correct?
I was informed of it on the 4th of December. I'm not sure when it was actually done.
Okay. Now, sir, you mentioned that that you were part of that meeting with the prosecutors, the very first meeting?
Yes.
And you
Yes.
mentioned that you were present.
I think he jumped in there in the middle of your thing. What did you say, Doctor?
I said, what did I say regarding what,
You
Judge?
said yes, and then you said something else. that you were present at the meeting. Didn't you say something else?
No, I just said yes.
Okay.
You mentioned in your direct testimony that Sean McKibben was there, correct?
That's correct.
And that's another Mount Carmel administrator.
That's correct.
And you said, I believe general counsel was there as well. You recall saying that?
Yes.
You didn't mention that there was a criminal defense lawyer present, right?
That's correct.
And this criminal defense lawyer represented Mount Carmel, is he not?
Yes.
And this criminal defense lawyer was retained to set up the meeting, was he not?
Objection as to why the criminal defense counsel was retained.
If he knows. Do you
I
know
was
why he was
told that he arranged.
Okay.
I was told he arranged the meeting.
Were you aware that he worked for that office for 14 years?
At some point, I was made aware of that.
Okay.
I don't remember if I knew that at the time of the meeting or later.
Was there one criminal defense lawyer at this meeting or two?
I only recall the one.
Okay, and would that be Mr. Greg Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Peterson became the liaison between Mount Carmel and the prosecutor's office, right?
I believe so, yes.
And then at that point, there was a project or an operation, I guess is the best I could describe, called Project Lighthouse. Are you aware of that operation, sir?
You asked him that a bit ago.
I have asked him about the reports.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was aware of the name Project Lighthouse that was assigned to everything to do with these cases and the issues around them. It wasn't necessarily an operation or a project. It was this particular set of issues,
Well,
as it was explained to me.
sir, as a hospital administrator, you're aware that sometimes operations are given titles like the one of Project Lighthouse so that certain documents could be kept confidential within the attorney-client privilege, right?
Yes?
Okay.
Yes.
And Project Lighthouse was one of those such operations, was it not?
Yes.
Now, sir, as part of Project Lighthouse, Trinity had employed a crisis management group by the name of Jared, did it not?
What was the name again?
Jared. Does that name sound familiar to you?
It does not.
You testified under direct examination that you had external, I'm trying to look at the way you described it, external consultants.
Yes.
And this was in the area of communications, was it not?
Yes.
And these external experts created a thing called a playbook in terms of what the message would be to the media. Did it not?
I believe so.
And in there, as you described in your direct examination, you said you attended several meetings as to what should be communicated and how they should be communicated. Did you not?
Yes.
And one of those ways of how things should be communicated, there were discussions and topics that were passed around amongst the executives or high-level executives as to what the message should be, right?
Yes.
And that message, sir, was who would be the villain, who would be the victim, and who would be the vindicator. Do you recall that, sir?
I recall hearing about that.
Okay? And the villain was to be, it was decided that the villain was to be Dr. William Husel, as well as the nurses and pharmacists, excluding the ones excluding the pharmacists who reported the incident and excluding the nurses who had preceptors. Isn't that a fact, sir?
I don't recall those details.
You do recall, sir, the detail of making Dr. William Husel a villain in the media, do you not?
I recall the decisions made that when identifying what the issues were, that Dr. Husel had prescribed excess doses of these medications.
Objection, Your Honor. He should be allowed to answer the question.
Let him finish his answer.
Really called for a yes or no.
No, it didn't, but go ahead, doctor, finish your answer.
I recall the message being that Dr. Husel had ordered and prescribed excessive doses of these medications that may have led to premature death of certain patients. I don't recall anyone saying to me, we are identifying him as a villain per se.
Sir, I sent to your attorney an attachment with defendant's exhibit MCD6. I would ask him to hand that to you right now. It's a document titled High-Level Questions for Decisions, and the version is December 18, 2018 at 5:30 p.m. Can you please retrieve that, sir?
Let's see the doc.
We're looking for it.
These were not stamped. Can you provide a more descriptive summary of the document?
The question is, can there be a more descriptive summary of the document?
Sure, if I could have a moment.
I'm taking a look, doc. Have some patience.
Okay.
These were not pre-stamped, the version you stated.
Mr. Zion, any objection?
I do object, Your Honor.
It's not his. Let's see where it goes.
Okay, I'll try and describe it a little bit better. It was in the first email attachment 1.
Stop. I thought you looked at a document.
He has not.
I think we've found the document.
I'd like for you to
Look at it,
review.
doc.
I'm sorry?
Review the document so we can see if it helps you for whatever purpose here.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, sir. You've reviewed the first question.
Okay, lay your foundation
Yes.
first.
Does that refresh your recollection as to what the high-level questions for decision
Objection,
were?
Your Honor.
No, you don't have a foundation question yet. Lay your foundation.
Sure. Sir, is that, you look it over, you understand it?
Yes, I understand it.
Okay. Now, sir,
Okay, well, you still got a foundation to lay.
I'm about to ask. Sir, does that refresh your recollection as to who was to be made the bill?
Objection, Your Honor.
Indicator?
Sustained.
Does that refresh your recollection, sir?
Sustained.
Can we approach, because
Yeah.
I'm a little lost on what you're...
Ladies and gentlemen, take yourself busy. You guys hold up, okay? We're down 45 minutes till break. ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Baez.
Thank you. Dr. Swanner, after having reviewed that document, does that refresh your recollection as to who is to be made the victim, villain, and vindicator?
It vaguely refreshes my memory because I vaguely now remember some conversations about this.
And
As it says on the front,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were saying?
on the front, it does in quotes indicate the villain and several choices of who that should be identified as.
Did you ever?
I'm not sure if...
Okay, we're good.
Sure.
Next question.
Did you ever, sir, confront the communications people and say, this is wrong. I will not participate in making someone a villain?
No, because that particular communications consultant, I think, was replaced by someone else before this became active.
Okay. Let me ask you this, sir. Eventually, you were asked to participate in making some videos. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And these were videos that were to be distributed to both internal employees as well as to the public in Columbus, Ohio, correct?
Yes.
And part of this playbook, these videos were part of this playbook, was it not?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Now, you didn't write or direct these videos, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to draw your attention to Defendant's Exhibit MCD 8. Can you take a look at that? Okay.
Can you describe the title of that?
Yeah, could you describe the title of the document?
Sure.
These that we have evidently are not labeled.
Sure. It's attachment 3 of the email I sent. The document title is External Messaging Version, December 18, 2018, 10:48 p.m. Eastern Standard.
Okay.
Actually, that's not the one I wanted to draw your attention to. I apologize, sir. I'm referring to number 5, attachment 5, external version of December 27, 2018, 5:15 p.m. Do you see that, sir?
Okay. Yes.
For the record is MCD 10. Now,
Yes.
you recognize this as a Mount Carmel document?
Yes.
And you also recognize this as the script that was given to you and Mr. Lamb, the president of Mount Carmel. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
this, in fact, is a script that you read and created a video for, correct?
That's correct.
Judge, I'd like to publish it.
Any objection?
Let me get a cleaner version. Oh, go ahead. So this one, I'm sorry. Okay. Now, before we bring that up, let me ask you this. You didn't write this?
No.
And you mentioned during direct examination that you got media training from these consultants.
A little bit, yes.
Okay, but this was more of an acting job, right?
Yes.
And you had to read a script from a teleprompter?
Not until I did this.
This is the first time you've ever had to read from a teleprompter, right?
That's correct.
I notice you have a background in pharmacy. You don't have one in acting, do you?
No.
Okay, and on this script, I'd like to go ahead and show it to you. draw your attention to this portion right here, where it says, during the 5 years he worked here, this former employee ordered fatal doses of pain medication. Do you see that? You can take it down.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Take that down. Now, sir, this was the message on 12/27/18 that you read on behalf of Mount Carmel with also the president, Mr. Ed Lamb, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you mentioned Katie Barga had brought these complaints originally to your attention, and she is the patient safety risk officer, right?
That's correct.
And she was in charge of the internal investigation for the root cause analysis, correct?
Yes.
And that was started, well, I should say, that was completed on the 5th of January, correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I'll get the time. Give me a second, I'll find. Does that date sound about right?
It sounds about right, yes.
Okay. Subsequent, aside from doing many takes of these videos, you had to do a few. You didn't get it the first time, right?
I'm sorry, I have a hard time hearing you when you move away.
Sure.
From the
Aside from doing several takes of this video, you had to do several takes. You didn't get it right the first time, right?
That's correct.
You also had multiple versions or different videos that you made, right?
I did make more than one video.
Right. That was my question. Sir, after the root cause analysis was done on January 5th, you did a new video on the 12th. Is that correct?
I don't remember the dates. That could be correct.
Okay. I'd like to draw your attention to attachment 4, and that's, for the record, Defendant's Exhibit MCD 9. And it says external messaging important for statement, version January 12, 2019, 12:30 p.m.
Okay.
Sir, you recognize this as a Mount Carmel document?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and this was in fact the script you were given to read?
I believe. Yes.
And do you have a name?
Which one is this the one? I don't see it.
MCD 9.
I don't see this. Are you referring to the Bates number? I don't have that. You guys can give us labels up.
The one dated 1/12/19.
We've got several dated 1/12/19. Is this the one you're referring to? At 12:30 p.m. Eastern time? Email?
Yeah.
Where's the script? Oh, it's down here. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. May I publish, Judge? I don't believe you have an
Objection?
objection.
No objection.
Now, sir, after the root cause, we already talked about your first, I want to bring you into the timeline of events here. I showed you previously the one you did in December, the video you made in December. You recall that, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you don't have an issue with the January 5th being the date that the root cause analysis was complete, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then this version was subsequent to that, which would be January 12th, 2019, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to draw your attention to the end of paragraph 2, where it says, it is possible the extra medication wrongly shortened many of their lives. Do you see that? The very last sentence.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure.
Oh, okay, I thought you were talking about the script.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute. But do you see that there?
Yes.
Okay. That was the message sent out to the media, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the next page. Now let's go look at the script. I want to direct your attention now to, scroll up, please. Keep going down. Down, I guess. Down. Keep going, down. Just bring that whole page up, the next page. All right. Now, no, I'm sorry, go back to the next page. I want this part here. A little more, down. It's gonna catch up. Keep going down. I want to basically look at here and draw your attention to where there's numerous edits here. See where failed to report the excessive doses in a timely manner as they were required to do so was taken out?
Yes.
And then the next paragraph where it says it's possible the extra medication shortened many or shortened some of their lives. Do you see that?
Yes.
The word likely is scratched out, correct?
Yes.
And the word many is also scratched out, correct?
Yes.
And then go back down to this section here. It's coming. Scroll down. Yeah. The very last sentence on this page here. The doses often is scratched out and says potentially fatal, right?
Yes.
You can take it down. So, in December, your message to the public, sir, as directed by Mount Carmel, were that these were fatal doses. Remember reading that from the script?
Yes. Yes.
And then, after the root cause analysis comes out, it's now possible that the extra medication wrongly shortened many of their lives. You read that, correct?
Correct.
And instead of often, these doses were often, it was changed to these doses were potentially fatal, correct?
Yes.
Now, you were still meeting with law enforcement and the prosecutor's office when you made this video, were you not?
I don't recall if I was still personally meeting. I was not meeting with the prosecutor's office at that point. I don't recall if I was meeting with detectives.
Did you ever pick up the phone and call either the police or the prosecutors and tell them about the results of your root cause analysis?
No.
Did you ever pick up the phone and call the prosecutors or the police and tell them, we think that these doses were potentially fatal?
No.
Did you ever pick up the phone and tell the prosecutors or the police that it's possible these medications shortened their lives?
No.
Sir, some of the other discussions that were had, the internal discussions from Project Lighthouse and the playbook, also raised the question as to whether you should self-report to the Department of Justice. Isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, someone coughed. I didn't hear what you said after.
Sorry, I want to look at you. It's
Lighthouse.
kind of hard sideways. Some of the questions, or one of the questions raised during Project Lighthouse's playbook was that whether or not Mount Carmel should self-report to the Department of Justice. Isn't that a fact, sir?
I don't remember those discussions.
If I show you, well, if I show you a document, an internal document from Project Lighthouse revolving these questions or asking these questions, would that refresh your recollection?
I'm happy to look at them. I don't know.
Okay. I'd like to draw your attention to Attachment 8, Defendants, for the record, Defendants Exhibit MCD 13, and it's titled Privileged and Confidential Draft FAQs Updated 12/29/18.
That was enough. You directed him accordingly.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
On page 10, if I can direct your attention to.
No. You asked if he could refresh his memory.
I'm just going to tell him where to look, that's it.
Well, he has the right to look at the document to see if it refreshes his memory.
Okay.
Now, sir, as it relates to.
Okay, hold on. Doctor, does that refresh your memory?
No, I don't recall seeing this document ever before.
Okay. In light of that, let me ask you this. Did you ever self-report to the Department of Justice that controlled substances were not, well, that there was an issue with controlled substances at the pharmacy?
Me personally?
Yes, you.
No.
Were you ever part of any discussions with other executives at Mount Carmel surrounding the decision as to whether you should self-report to the Department of Justice?
I don't recall any meetings where that was discussed.
Sir, as a hospital administrator, you're aware that entities such as Mount Carmel have been held criminally liable by the Department of Justice for failure to control controlled substances? Are you not?
Yes. Yes.
And you're aware that this is a serious crime, are you not?
Yes.
And you're also aware that you, as one of the executives, could also be held criminally liable.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Are you aware as to whether that was the reason Mount Carmel hired 2 criminal defense lawyers?
No, it was not explained to me the rationale behind it.
Now, sir, you talked about some of the external messages. Well, no, let me rephrase that. You talked about how
in your direct examination, you talked about making phone calls to the family members. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you were also given a script for those specific calls, were you not?
Yes.
Sir, you're aware that executives if I can have just a second, I want to make sure I get the right date. Were you aware of a meeting on December 17th, 2018 with Trinity Health CCO, Mount Carmel's General Counsel, Criminal Defense Counsel, Vice President of Strategy and Planning, meeting with the prosecutors?
No,
Nobody told you about it?
not that I recall.
Okay, and I'm specifically referring December 17, 2018.
I don't recall hearing about that.
Okay. Is there any reason, as an executive at Mount Carmel, why the Vice President of Strategy and Planning would be meeting with the prosecutor?
I'm not aware. I know the communications department reported to him, but I don't know why he was in attendance with the prosecutor. I don't know.
Based on this case, and what you know about this case, the Vice President of Strategy and Planning wouldn't be able to provide any...
Okay, you're walking away from the mic.
Wouldn't be able to provide any information to the prosecutors, isn't that correct?
Sustained.
Now, sir, the very next day, I'd like to bring your attention to one of the scripts that you had to read to the family members. And that is attachment 3, for the record, MCD 8. The title of the document is External Messaging, gives the date 12/18/18, titled Outreach to Patient Families. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Unless there's any objection. You recognize this as a Mount Carmel document?
Yes, I do.
You see it as one of the scripts that you were given to read to the family members?
Yes.
Okay.
This isn't actually a script as much as it's a guideline, I think.
Well, keep looking.
Okay, let's relax. Let's look at the doc.
Okay.
Okay. Unless there's any objection, I'd like to publish.
Any objection? Okay.
Let's go. Now, in this document, two scenarios are discussed, correct?
Yes.
And scenario number 1 is detective is the first point of contact in relation to the families being interviewed, correct?
Yes.
And it lists here the detectives will be the first point of contact. In this scenario, the detectives will be the first point of contact with the family as part of their investigation. And it says the detective will use the talking points below regarding Mount Carmel. Do you see that?
Yes.
And will offer a card and a dedicated phone number that they can call. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it lists the talking points for the detective, right?
Yes.
Okay. The detectives work for Mount Carmel? As far as you know? I'm sorry?
No.
Okay. Let's scroll down. Keep going down. Let's go to scenario number 2 is Mount Carmel is the first point of contact because family is not part of the investigation. Do you see that?
Yes?
It lists that the family is not part of the investigation there, correct?
Yes?
If in fact Mount Carmel under scenario 2 is the first point of contact, correct?
Yes?
And in there it lists all of the talking points by the initial outreach identified by you, correct?
They asked me to talk to and pick appropriate physicians from the medical staff to be involved with this messaging and to get their permission and agreement to work with us on that. So that's what my job was ahead of time.
Okay, but you testified on direct, you made these calls, right?
Yes.
And in fact, it was determined that scenario 2 would be the way things played out, correct?
Yes. Yes, okay.
So Mount Carmel had the first opportunity to speak to the witnesses in these murder cases, correct?
I don't think we had the first opportunity. I think the detectives may have. I was told that Columbus Police had signed off on us calling these people. So, for whatever that means.
All right, so for whatever it means, sir, it ultimately resulted in Mount Carmel reaching out to the families 1 month before the regarding ever spoke to a single family member. Isn't that correct, sir?
Objection as to what his knowledge is regarding what the detectives.
I would object to the speaking objection suggesting an
Okay,
answer.
both of you, stop. Overruling the objection, can you answer the question? You remember what the question
I don't
was?
know. I do know what the question is, but I don't know when the detectives had the opportunity or did go speak to the families. So I don't know if this was before that or what.
Well, I know you can't testify as to what the detectives did, so let me ask it this way. You reported this to the police December 5th, 2018, correct?
That's correct.
December 7th, detectives were talking to Mount Carmel employees, correct?
That's correct.
Employees you never spoke to during your investigation, correct?
That's correct.
And you didn't start making these calls until after Christmas, which is specifically December 27th, 2018, correct?
Correct, I believe. I don't remember the exact date, but that sounds about right.
And given those dates, it stands to reason, sir, that the detectives had the opportunity to speak with them from December 5th all the way until December 27th, but did not, correct?
Objection once again.
He knows he was the first.
Okay, I'll permit the answer. Do you know the answer?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
December 5th, you guys go to the police, right?
Yes.
December 27th, you start notifying the families, right?
Correct.
They're already interviewing people on the 7th, correct?
Yes.
So they could have interviewed these family members and these witnesses all throughout that month of December, couldn't they have?
Yes.
But as far as you know, because that, well, let me rephrase that, but as far as you know, they did not.
That's correct.
And this is after meetings with you, criminal defense counsel, and the prosecutors, right?
Yes.
As well as a meeting with the vice president of strategy and planning from Mount Carmel, correct?
Yes.
Now, sir, I'm just about wrapping up. Now, you testified on direct examination that Mount Carmel wanted to be transparent, right?
Yes?
You never told any media members about these conversations about making Dr. Husel a villain, did you, sir?
Okay.
No, I never did speak to the media myself.
Okay. Now, sir, you also weren't allowed to tell them who the doctor was, correct?
That's correct.
And you also weren't allowed to give them any more information that was listed in your script, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, there was a plan laid out in the event that the families wanted to meet with members of the hospital, correct?
Yes?
And in fact, there was a separate plan if the meetings, if any of the patient's families showed up with lawyers. Isn't that correct?
I believe there was.
Okay. So Mount Carmel and their playbook anticipated that patients would probably get lawyers, right?
I think they anticipated that that was a possibility.
If I could have just one moment, Judge, I want to see if I have anything else. Sir, you were talking about the transparency with the families that you wanted, that Mount Carmel wanted to have. Do you remember that?
Yes?
You never, or as far as you're aware, Mount Carmel never disclosed the root cause analysis to the patient families, did they?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And as far as you know, I'll strike that question. Let me ask you this now. You said that you were placed on leave on January 25th. You were placed on administrative leave. Do you recall testifying about that?
Yes. Yes?
And you were told when you were placed on leave, sir, that, or let me rephrase that. It was your understanding that the reason you were being placed on leave was because Mount Carmel wanted to appear as if they were conducting a neutral investigation. Isn't that correct, sir?
That's not the way it was presented to me.
Give me a second, sir. I want to make sure I get something. Let me rephrase that. It's your understanding, sir, that they wanted to avoid any impression that there was any lack of objectivity in the investigation. Isn't that correct?
To be honest, I was not presented with anything that had to do with observation or impressions.
Sir, do you recall giving a deposition under oath in a matter dated September 9th, 2020, in a matter that involved Mount Carmel Health System and one of the families?
Yes.
Okay. And at that time, you had an attorney present representing you?
Yes.
And at that time, you were under oath?
Yes.
Much closer in time to the incidents than today?
Yes.
Fair to say your memory would have been better at that time?
Perhaps, yes.
Okay. Do you remember, sir, stating, I was told that several people, as I said, executives and leaders, were being placed on leave while this investigation occurred so that it would avoid any impression that there was a lack of objectivity in the investigation? Do you recall making that statement, sir?
Yes, I do.
Now, sir, you were then fired on September 11, 2019, right?
No, I was terminated on July 11th.
I'm sorry, July 11, 2019. You were fired, right?
Yes.
And no one came and spoke to you. Well, let me rephrase that. And you weren't given a reason as to why you were fired, right?
That's correct.
And no one came and spoke to you at any time between January and July to allow you to give your version of why you should still be employed, right?
That's correct.
Just like they did with Dr. Husel, right?
No, I believe there was a difference.
Okay. The difference is you spoke to Dr. Husel, correct?
I did.
That's the only, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You said yes?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And that was, of course, 2 days before his privileges were renewed, right?
Okay, asked and answered. Let's move on.
Now, sir, subsequent to being fired, you were fired by Ed Lamb, right?
Yes.
And the three people above you, well, subsequent to you being fired, you tried to obtain new employment, did you not?
I did, yes.
And you asked the three people who you worked for above you at Mount Carmel to endorse you on LinkedIn, did you not?
That's correct.
And they gave you glowing recommendations, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Despite the fact that they fired you.
Yes.
And subsequent to all of that, you have now retired. Isn't that correct, sir?
That is correct.
And you blame Dr. Husel for being forced into retirement, don't you, sir?
I blame several factors. Being terminated, COVID, my age. I think what occurred around Dr. Husel and his behavior also contributed to that.
So, sir, they knew your age when they fired you?
Pardon me?
They knew, Mount Carmel knew your age when they fired you?
Yes.
Okay. And have you initiated a lawsuit for age discrimination against Mount Carmel?
Sustained.
You eventually negotiated a settlement agreement, did you not?
Sustained.
No further questions.
Okay, we'll go into recess. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful break, 15 minutes. We'll get started back. I didn't think you could do it in 3 minutes.
You asked all right. Needs to be more time, sir.
Okay, do you need more time than 15 minutes?
15 minutes will be fine. I appreciate the timing,
Okay.
Judge.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great break.